Hey guys, Trey here. I wanted to switch things up a little bit today. Usually we talk about severe weather, tornadoes, hail, damaging winds today. Wanted to focus on the tropics a little bit more in this video. We have Tropical Storm Hanna in the Gulf of Mexico that is expected to make landfall along the Texas coast sometime tomorrow. Um, I'm not a tropical weather expert or a hurricane expert by any means, but I do have been studying a lot over the last few years and have really increased my knowledge of tropical storms and how they work. So, wanted to discuss a little bit about the current state of Hanna, what I think is going to happen with Hanna, based on the environmental sort of setup, and then we'll look at some model data at the end to kind of give some solutions, some possible solutions of how Hanna may progress over the next day or so. If you live in these areas along the Texas coast, all the way from Houston and Galveston down toward Brownsville and Port Isabel down here along the mouth of the Rio Grande, anywhere in those areas, be sure to stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center and your local National Weather Service offices for the latest information and most accurate information on any tropical storm warnings, any flash flood warnings, watches, etc., that you may need to take into consideration. So let's take a look at Hanna. This is the forecast cone. Its location at 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time this morning was just basically south of Lake Charles in the Gulf of Mexico, well offshore right now, but is just kind of a proxy, kind of just due south of Lake Charles, roughly. It's going to move to the west as we go throughout the day today. It's moving right now toward the west-northwest. It's expected to make a turn toward the due west and even west-southwest as it makes landfall over the coming day or so. And we'll take a look at the infrared satellite image right now. This is up to date, and it's been a loop of the last couple hours. You can see a just huge mass of convection here in the Gulf of Mexico. But you'll notice that it's a very asymmetric storm. The center is somewhere around here, right? And all the convection is located to the south and the east of the center. So this is a very asymmetric storm. Well, what causes that? Well, number one could be shear. But if we go to the forecast models, this is the GFS, and this is a great site called Tropical Tidbits. Levi Cowan used to be a PhD student at Florida State. He now works for NOAA, working on hurricane stuff. But this is an excellent site for anything tropical. It's got model data. It's got even the aircraft from the data from the hurricane hunters in real time as it comes in, and lots more tools you can use. And he posts a video every night as well, going over his thoughts on YouTube. So definitely check his site out. But this is we're going to take an area average sounding across the vortex. This is using the GFS model initialization, and you can see there's not a whole lot of shear to deal with. In the low and mid levels, the flow is out of the southeast. Maybe changes a little bit to more due easterly as you go up, but that's not that much of an issue. Really not a whole lot of shear to deal with to shear this storm apart. It's just in its early stages of formation. This storm is a relatively young storm, and it's still getting its act together, simply. The low-level center was a little bit farther south last night. It's kind of reformed. It's going through this sort of reformation process, if you will, to the north, and it's just got to get established. And one thing, though, that is taking a bite out of any convection here in the sort of to the west of the center is the some dry air. This is the Corpus Christi sounding from this morning. And you notice in a typical tropical profile in the vicinity of a hurricane, you'd like to see this green dew point line and the temperature line pretty close together. That means you have a saturated atmosphere, lots of moisture aloft to sustain deep convection. across the entire vortex. Well, this is not really the case. We do have a little bit of dry air aloft from in the mid and upper levels. Of course, if you're on land and this is a severe weather setup, this is not a bad thing at all to have a little bit of dry air aloft. But with a tropical storm like this, you want to see we don't like to see a lot of dry air aloft, and I think this dry air. This is the Brownsville sounding just south of Corpus Christi. This dry air is getting entrained into the vortex a little bit. And it's eating away at any convection that might form and sustain in the northwest quadrant of the storm. So that is something that's tempering the strengthening at the moment. Just the fact that it's still a little bit misaligned, but once this center reforms, and for reference, this is the NAM model. We'll take a look at 700 millibar relative humidity, and to show that it is expected to moisten out here ahead of the storm pretty significantly by Friday, by tonight and into tomorrow morning. That dry air is expected to mix out and really moisten the profile, so we won't have too much of an issue, I don't think, with convection with this storm staying super asymmetrical. It still might be. It's not going to be a strong hurricane by the time it makes landfall. So a little asymmetry is not going to be is definitely going to be something I'd expect to see by the time it makes landfall. But I do think this dry air will mix out, and the convection will be able to sustain itself to the west of the center, and we'll get a little bit more of a symmetric vortex by the time it makes landfall. So let's take a look at some model data. Again, this storm is moving very slowly to the west-northwest at the minute. So let's take a look at why that is. So here's the NAM model forecast. We'll back out to the continental United States, and we will notice that we have a pretty significant ridge here across the central United States. Big anticyclone centered across Oklahoma and Kansas, providing some nice easterly steering flow, east to west steering flow for Hanna to contend with. So that is pushing this storm along right now at a pretty slow clip toward the west-northwest. As the day progresses, though, that ridge gets a little bit stronger, a little bit broader, and as a result, the storm is forced a little bit more to the west than it is currently going. A little bit of a stronger ridge means that the tropical storm can't really fight that steering flow as much, so it's going to turn a little bit more to the due west, probably sometime later today, by this evening, if not by this evening, by early tomorrow morning. And we're going to have a fairly low shear environment to deal with. This is the steering flow aloft at 500 millibars, and you can see not much change at, this is 850 millibars. The wind's basically out of the almost due east out here in the southern plains into the Gulf of Mexico. So not a whole lot of shear to deal with for Hanna. And again, we have that dry air mixing out. And one thing to note is the sea surface temperatures. This is the current sea surface temperatures plot from Tropical Tidbits once again. You can see the Gulf is extremely, extremely warm right now, pushing 30 degrees Celsius temperatures all across the Gulf, right up here to the Texas coastline. Very warm sea surface temperatures. So a low shear environment with that dry air filling in, and this very warm sea surface right along the coast here, would expect some strengthening before Hanna makes it to the coastline. I don't see a lot in the way of this storm weakening at all. I do think there will be some strengthening by the time it hits the coast. And it is expected to slow down a little bit right as it's making landfall. So if it can sit over these open waters a little bit longer, we could see a decently quick intensification with the system. Not going to call it rapid intensification by any means, but I do believe that we could see maybe a slightly stronger storm than the National Hurricane Center is indicating, as well as the models are indicating. Let's take a look at some forecast data here. We'll take a look at the hurricane models first. This is the HWRF for Hanna. This is the initialization right now. You can see it's showing a very asymmetric storm, all that convection located to the south and southeast and east of the center. But this model's had a pretty good handle on Hanna so far. And if this is the 6Z run, the 0Z run not quite in yet, but you notice we get a little bit more of a symmetric look and convection to fill in to the east and northeast of the center by the time it makes landfall. And right at landfall, it's got 977 millibar pressure, a 977 millibar pressure. That's low-end Category 1 right there. Again, these models tend to overdo the intensity a little bit. You can still see it's kind of a ragged storm by the time it makes landfall, but it's definitely filled in a little bit, and it's definitely a little bit more symmetric on this model. I would not be surprised to see this happen. The storm make a run at Category 1. I think this might be a little generous with the intensity, but I do think this is a trend we'll have to watch, especially if you're along the Texas coast. Makes landfall right just south of Corpus Christi, and then, of course, weakens as it goes inland. But with, again, the warm sea surface temperatures, low shear environment, I do think some strengthening is going to happen with this storm. How much is still in question, but the HWRF has handled the storm pretty well so far, so that is something we'll have to watch for sure. Let's look at the HMON model. We'll back out to our current time right here. Again, very asymmetric storm. This is also the 6Z run, and you can see this is not as much of a fan of this storm as the HWRF was. It's a very kind of ragged storm, but we do get a little bit of convection to fill in to the west, north, and northeast of the center by the time it makes landfall. This has it going down to 983 millibars, so probably a strong tropical storm at that point, but a very ragged storm for sure. Definitely not as bullish as the HWRF was. We can look at the HMON. That was the HMON, excuse me. We can look at the GFS as well. We'll back out. GFS has not been a fan of the system from the get-go. Not quite sure why, but it is not like this storm. And you can see right there, it just doesn't do anything with this storm and has it all the way down well south of Corpus Christi here. So GFS favoring a more southerly landfall, but doesn't really develop this storm into much at all. It doesn't even go sub 1,000 millibars until it gets on land, until it gets inland. So that is a little concerning. CMC hasn't done well with this as well. Doesn't have much in the way of development here. Does get sub 1,000 millibars, but a very ragged asymmetric storm. I think something like the HMON, a combination, sort of a middle ground between the HMON and the HWRF is something that we're likely to see. I don't think it's going to go balls to the wall and become a decent Category 1 or 2 storm. I just think that's out of the question. It's not going to spend enough time over water to have that happen. But I think something between this right here, where we have kind of a ragged storm, deepening low pressure though, making a run at Category 1, but probably a strong tropical storm, and the HWRF model right here. Category 1 hurricane, very nicely symmetric storm here with spiral banding. I think that might be a little bit on the high end. I think something between the HMON and the HWRF is something that we'll see with this storm, given the environment. There is also a 2% tornado threat with this system. Tropical cyclone tornadoes are definitely going to be a threat here, I believe, given how much this storm is kind of overperformed so far. A couple days ago, we were not expecting the wind fields to really increase that much with this tropical storm, but now that it's expected to be a strong tropical storm, maybe a weak Category 1 hurricane, wind fields will strengthen enough to get some of a tornado threat along the central Texas and southern Texas coast. So let's take a look at that real quickly. We can go to the NAM here. The NAM is not a good tropical model, but it might be able to give us a hint of the environment out ahead of this storm. Again, tropical cyclone tornadoes favor the right front quadrant or the northeast quadrant. The right front quadrant is based on the direction of motion, so we'll say it's due west. So if we split this up in half, it would be this quadrant out here. Also, the northeast quadrant would be something to watch. Just if you're looking at the storm, the northeast quadrant, we split this in half. This would be the northeast quadrant, and the stronger low-level wind field does look to be in the northeast quadrant. So we do get some veering in the low levels. You can see that some pretty decent veering in the low levels with a decent amount of 3 Cape. This is a little bit contaminated here. Of course, it's a hurricane. We're dealing with convection, but there is some looping in the low levels. So, but is it substantial enough to get a really substantial tornado threat? It's hard to say. I don't know if this will be a significant tornado producer like we saw with Florence a couple years back. That was as it made landfall along the Carolina coast. There was a big tornado outbreak. There was one in, I believe, Richmond, Virginia that was an EF2. This is not showing a whole lot here in terms of the low-level wind fields. Let's take a look at the forecast models here as it makes landfall. Oops. And we'll go forward here as it makes landfall. We'll look here the northern half of the storm and see. And not much in the way of curvature in the hodograph. So this one not too favorable for tornadoes, it appears. But there will be some enhancement of the low-level wind fields, and it really doesn't take much to get little spin-ups in those outer bands, those outer spiral bands with tropical storms like this. It doesn't take much at all. All you need is maybe a little bit of surface heating, steep lapse rates in the low levels, decent low-level buoyancy, and you'll get tropical cyclone tornadoes even with a modest amount of curvature in the low-level hodograph. But the wind fields will respond nicely here. Not like a strong tropical storm, but we will see at least some curvature in the low levels that may lead to a few tornadoes out here from probably right around the Corpus Christi area, maybe a little bit farther up the coast. Still a little bit uncertain where this thing is going to exactly make landfall, but would favor definitely the northeast quadrant, which would put Corpus Christi areas just to the northeast under the gun tomorrow for a tornado threat. So that's about all I have for today. Tried to keep it a little bit simple and not go into the nitty-gritty details. But for those of you along the Texas coast, even as far up as Houston and Galveston, although I do think that is a little bit too far north to feel major impacts, potentially some storm surge out here up by Houston and Galveston. But if you're along the Texas coast, including Corpus Christi, down toward Brownsville, Port Isabel, Port Mansfield, Padre Island, South Padre Island, you will be under the gun for this, and definitely need to keep a watch at the forecast. Flash flooding is going to be a major threat as well. We do have flash flood watch hoisted for parts of South Texas, so storm surge could be a major issue as well with those easterly low-level winds in the northern half of the storm, just pushing all that water inland. We're going to get some flooding concerns with storm surge out here, including Corpus Christi areas just northeast of there. So definitely be on the lookout. Storm surge flooding is going to be an issue here, I believe. Heavy rainfall once it makes its way inland out here across these extreme southern Texas, and maybe a few tornadoes here up in the northeast quadrant as well. So Stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center for the latest forecast and your local National Weather Service office if you're in this area. Stay safe. This isn't going to be a major storm, but definitely will you will feel some impacts if you remain in these areas. So stay safe, and thanks for watching.